Kansas has to have a hotter start for Big 12 play this season. We're going to break down the early Big 12 portion of the season with West Virginia, Cincinnati, and UCF on today's episode.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. You can find us anywhere you get your podcasts on the audio side of things, as well as on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're talking the Big 12 openers for KU football. So important to a hot start, unlike they had last year. And we're going to take an early look at West Virginia, Cincinnati, and UCF for the first three conference games of the season for KU football. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. You'll be able to use Game Time to maybe go see some of those games for KU football. And download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. All right, we're going to start with West Virginia, move to Cincinnati, and then finish up at UCF. So obviously from the Kansas perspective, last year you lose your first couple conference games and you're looking for a hotter start this time, right? And it becomes interesting to me, like how often we are seeing KU play West Virginia at the early portion of the season and how that can kind of be the tone setter. Obviously you go back to 2022 and it was the tone setter, the new era game from Jalen Daniels, and that was the start of KU having a fun resurgence into bowl eligibility. You look at last season, and it was kind of toward the beginning of conference play, right after KU had struggled in the non-con with losses to Illinois and UNLV, and it represented an opportunity to start to turn their season around, and instead they, went from being up double digits with 4 minutes to go to losing the game, and it instead turned into a continued snowball effect of what the early portion of the season was last year for KU before they eventually turned it around with those, 3 straight ranked wins coming at the end of the season. So this time you get West Virginia for your Big 12 opener. Once again, it is your 4th game of the season. The good news for Kansas in this one is it comes off of a bye week. Lance Leipold's done well off of bye weeks, and I think that'll be really helpful, especially because the week before, your game before, you'll be playing Missouri, then you'll have the bye week. So that'll give you an opportunity to reset after the Missouri game, the rivalry game, where your emotions will be so high, but also get ready for Big 12 play and get healthy again. So West Virginia went 6-7 last year. And I guess looking back, turns out the difference in Kansas not making a bowl game last season and the difference of West Virginia making a bowl game last season, it was that comeback with 4 minutes to go. If that game, stays in KU's favor, KU's bowling and West Virginia is not. Now there's a new head coach for West Virginia, Rich Rodriguez, who's an old head coach who had so much success with West Virginia in his first stint over there. And then, eventually went on to some other schools. Most recently, he was at Jacksonville State where he had a lot of success. So if you look at Phil Steele, it actually picked West Virginia last in the Big 12. I don't know that I'm fully on board with that. But they were picked 11th in the Big 12 by ESPN SP+. That feels a little more right to me. 57th nationally there with the number 47 offense, number 73 defense. Hey, here's the thing, and this is why Phil Steele picked them so low. It was just a kind of an unknown, a continuity thing. And that makes them dangerous because maybe they have more talent than you would expect. The flip side, though, is, and this is a good thing that Kansas is playing them, I think, early in the season, they have 50 transfers, and over 30 of those for West Virginia are coming in post-spring ball. So it might take some of those guys a bit of time to get acclimated. That's why it's a good thing that Kansas is playing West Virginia earlier in the season as opposed to later where some of those, late transfers can get a little bit more settled in. Now, they do have 14 returning starters, according to Phil Steele. They have some interesting all-conference picks. Jaheim White is a running back who's really good, and Phil Steele gives them the number 1 running back room in the Big 12. Cam Vaughn leads a good group of receivers, not a ton of returning players, but 4 transfers who were starters at their previous stops. Now, the offensive line lost a ton of production from the year before. Phil still gives them the number 15 offensive line in the Big 12. So that should be something that Kansas should be able to take advantage of with their strong defensive line. But then the front seven's good for West Virginia on the defensive end. Jamori Robinson, good transfer for them. Chase Wilson at the linebacker spot. In the secondary, there's some questions overall, but they do have a couple good players, Michael Coates and Fred Perry, but they definitely struggled at the back end last year. A lot of new faces, so that could go either way. That could be, hey, you struggled last year and you have to replace people. That means you're going to be even worse, or it could be, addition by subtraction in some ways. Quarterback's going to be interesting. Garrett Green's gone. It's a quarterback battle for the guy that's going to be somebody who can literally, I say this, like run Rich Rodriguez's offense, because they're going to be running. That's what quarterbacks do. I will say one thing that is good for Kansas, I think, coming into this game. Now, Kansas obviously has the Missouri game as their previous game, and they're going to have to overcome coming off, the emotions of a rivalry like that. But again, they have the bye week leading up to it. West Virginia also has a rival before the Kansas game. They're playing Pittsburgh. The difference, though, is they don't have a bye, after the Pittsburgh game to regroup. So that could be one positive for KU coming into this game. They have that slight advantage over that. Now, what I think is also going to be really interesting is we saw, a lot of the Brian Borland KU defenses struggle with dual threat with rushing quarterbacks. That was always a problem for KU in slowing down rushing quarterbacks. And certainly going back to how Rich Rodriguez operates an offense, you would think that there's going to be a rushing quarterback for West Virginia. And to that notion, does that scare you at all about the KU defense? But then enter stage left DK McDonald, the new defensive coordinator for KU football. How is he going to do against mobile rushing quarterbacks? I'd be curious to know, from the Iowa State perspective, where McDonald, has ties. How have they done against teams who have rushing quarterbacks? Have they been able to limit it a little bit more? If so, does that, translate over to KU in some way? So how they do against that, I think, will be very interesting. And I think it'll be a good opportunity for KU to show, with the new defense, like what exactly they can do. This will also be the Big 12 home opener for KU. Obviously, they'll have home games against Fresno State and Wagner before this, so it won't be the first games at the new stadium, but it'll be the first one in the Big 12. But I think so important to get off to a good start, and especially too, if you do, you're going to be underdogs at Missouri. Let's say you lose that game and you're coming off a loss. You don't want things to snowball at any point of the season. We saw that effect of that, last year. So it could either be a way for KU to, if you do beat Missouri, even better, but then you're kind of resetting because you're like, okay, this is an opportunity we want to know in conference play. Flip side, if you lose to Missouri, it's an opportunity to bounce back. And so, that's going to be something where can Kansas, figure out a way to beat West Virginia on their home turf coming off of a bye week. They should be well prepared for it. So the next team they have after that is Cincinnati, and that one is also at home. So we'll discuss that game and an early preview of the Bearcats next. This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Drip Drop. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether that's workouts, long days on campus, or staying focused through back-to-back classes, hydration is where it all starts, and that's where Drip Drop comes in. Drip Drop is doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. They've got all sorts of flavors online too. So, if you're into one thing and not into the other, you can go all with that. You can try a bunch of different flavors. There's berry, there's watermelon, there's tropical variety pack. Just highly recommend going and checking out on the website, dripdrop.com, and seeing the different flavors. And if you're one of those people who's like, what, I want to do sugar-free, well, guess what? They got that too. So right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com, use promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off your order. Stock up now before the heat hits with Drip Drop. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, anywhere you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Don't forget, too, you can check out Locked On College Football or Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day as well. Okay, so the West Virginia game, just got into that. And next up is Cincinnati, and Cincinnati is one of the teams that I'm kind of higher on. Like the Vegas over-under win total for West Virginia is 5.5. I'd probably lean over that. I think they're like a 6-win team. So, that would be over. The Cincinnati one, there's a 6.5. So it's slightly up here. And honestly, I'd probably lean over on that one too. I think Cincinnati could be a 7 or 8 win football team this year. So they're 5-7 last year. And that was a 2-win improvement for them, but kind of interesting because they were kind of an inverse of Kansas, where Kansas started slow and finished hot. Cincinnati started hot. They were 5-2, but they finished 5-7. Now you could say that's going to lead to some, negative momentum going into the offseason for Cincinnati. But year 3 now for Scott Satterfield, like there's pressure on to start winning games to at least make it to bowl eligibility, if not win 7 or more games for them. So the pressure's on, which can, also work both ways. If they have a slow start to the season, then it really starts to ramp up. Now, if it doesn't, then you could just argue that it's like extra motivation, right? So interestingly enough, on Phil Steele, who, by the way, we had on, and thank you to the Everydayers who already caught that one. But Cincinnati on Phil Steele is picked 9th, which puts him in a tie with where he picked Kansas. So he has both, picked right in the middle of the conference, tied 9th. So that tells you right there that it's kind of a coin flip game. Now, obviously, Kansas gets it at home. That's a positive. So maybe it becomes, from going from a coin flip to you favored by 3 or 7 or something. And we did see Kansas go into Cincinnati for their regular season finale in 2023 and put up a really impressive showing. That was that unbelievable interception by Kobe Bryant. It was a great game for Jason Bean in the offense. And so maybe there is something advantage that they know how to play against Cincinnati. That Cincinnati team wasn't very good, though. This one's probably going to be better than that, right? But Cincinnati, 25 points per game last year, gave up about 25 points per game. And they were kind of similar, even though the season was kind of flipped and inverse to how it went for KU. They were very similar in that they struggled closing out not just games but halves, and that's what cost them bowl eligibility. And in the end, both teams finish 5-7. So I think there's an interesting correlation between the two teams, and I think they're both going to come into this game convincing themselves, hey, we can have a fun season where we win 8 or more games or something. But this is going to be kind of a coin flip game for both of the programs. But this year, interestingly enough, ESPN SP Plus has Cincinnati projected last in the Big 12, even though Phil Steele has them tied 9th. But, okay, going back to West Virginia was picked 11th there, and this is super interesting. So ESPN SP Plus has, which take it with a grain of salt. Like I like to reference it. It can be a good, metric and mention and give you a ballpark of things. There are certain flaws, but, that's with everything. But when you look at ESPN SP Plus, every team ranked 9th through 16th in the Big 12, so basically the bottom half projected of the conference by this metric, they are all rated between 50th to 66th nationally. So you have 8 teams in a conference all rated between 17 spots on a national perspective. If that does not tell you how close together these teams are in the Big 12, where it's like these really are coin flip games, and it just comes down to who's going to win the one-score games or maybe get a few breaks here or there or make the plays, those 2 plays in a given game, that's going to be the difference. But SP Plus has Cincinnati is the 86th best offense. I think they're a little better than that. 49th best defense. They have 15 returning starters, according to Phil Steele. All conference picks at tight end, Joe Royer. Jeff Caldwell as a 13 pick as a receiver. And that leads a group of 3 former starting receiver transfers, so it should be a pretty solid receiving unit. The tight end's really good. Running back Tywee Walker, he is a transfer from Wisconsin and Oklahoma who's been a productive player, so good pickup there. They did lose their previous starting running back, who was a good player, though. The offensive line, though, are really good. They have a second-team pick in Taron Tayo, 4th-team pick in Gavin Gerhardt, 4th-team pick in Joe Cotton. Those are 3 returning starters, and they're all conference picks, so should be a strong unit there. And that's really, to me, where Cincinnati becomes interesting, is on the line of scrimmage at both ends. Dante Corleone, the Godfather, all-conference defensive line pick. He leads the way with 6 of the top 8 contributors on the defensive line there. They also added a transfer starter from Old Dominion. So this is going to be a really good in-the-trenches team that Kansas is going to have to, be ready to kind of pound against, right? Jake Golday leads the linebackers. I don't know that they have like a superstar there. He was a 4th-team pick. but it's just a solid group. And then Matthew McDoom, which is a great name, is a fourth-team all-conference pick at corner. Not a ton of other returning production there, but they did have some solid, at least, portal additions. So overall, I view them as just being kind of like solid at most positions. Like their quarterback, I really like Brendan Sorsby. Solid kind of dual threat, can throw on the run. I just think they're solid at a lot of positions. And when you're solid at a lot of positions, even if you don't have the superstar, but you're good on the offensive and defensive line of scrimmage, that's why I think they can be a 7 or 8 win football team, which makes this a more difficult game than maybe you would view if they played them last year when they played them 2 years ago. What also makes this one tough is that Cincinnati is going to be coming off a bye week. So whereas Kansas is going to be coming off a bye week against West Virginia, Cincinnati will be coming off a bye week against Kansas. Now, on the positive for KU, this is going to be Cincinnati's first true road game of the season. They play a neutral game against Nebraska, which I'm pretty sure that's the game at Arrowhead, which I don't really know why they're doing that. I don't know. Maybe Nebraska fans are going to fill out Arrowhead's cash grab for Clark Hunt, I guess. I don't know. But point being, so that'll be a neutral site game that's going to be like a road game for them in that first game against Nebraska. But this will be their first true road game of the season when they play against KU. So the downside is they're coming off the bye. The plus side is that's the case, and maybe you can shock them a little bit. And be very interested to see how good of a home field advantage is this new stadium for KU. You would think that it's going to get fans pumped up. It's going to give them a nice home feeling, and that it's going to help in that regard. But that'll be certainly interesting coming into this game, a game that could be the difference in I don't know, one of these teams winning 8 games. Like that could be the difference in who comes out on top in this one. Let's finish up. KU plays at UCF the following week. What are the Knights with Scott Frost back as the head coach bring to the table? Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop the closer it gets to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Plus, you can get KU football tickets with Game Time. Right now, I'm looking at the Fresno State game coming up in week 0 on Saturday, August 23rd. I don't think any of the tickets have gone up for sale on the new side of the stadium, but they are up for sale on the old side. So there's going to be more tickets that go up soon. But I'm looking right now, section 24, row 60, lower sideline, $53. That's just one possible ticket, and that even includes the fees. I always toggle that, so I'm not surprised at checkout with Game Time. That's one of the beautiful many features of Game Time. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. All right, finishing up with KU's first Big 12 road game and second true road game of the season at UCF. And UCF is one of those teams that I put in the same bucket as I don't know, TCU, maybe Baylor would be in this, of teams where even when they're down, even when they had UCF went 4-8 last season, TCU could come off they were, not obviously this past season they won 8 or 9 games. The year before they won 4 or 5, but they're one of those teams where it's they could be coming off a down season, but based on the recruiting, the fertile recruiting grounds that they get to operate in our local too, they're always super close to popping up and having a breakout type of season with the players that they can attract kind of nearby locally. So they're one of those teams for me where it's okay, UCF is expected to be one of the worst teams in the Big 12, and it might just end up being that way. But typically at least one of those schools, and Kansas doesn't play TCU this year, so I guess the hope would be it's TCU or one of those. KU doesn't play Baylor this year. Maybe it's Texas Tech now with the money they're spending, is going to pop up and the talent's going to fit together, right? So that I do always find that interesting. But they went 4-8 last season. Gus Malzahn ended up leaving to, I guess, reset his coaching clock to be an offensive coordinator elsewhere. So the head coaching spot was open, and guess what? Scott Frost, former Nebraska head coach, former UCF head coach, comes in and takes over. Now, he worked a lot of magic with UCF his first time. They went from 0 wins, takes them over. They go to a bowl game, win 6 games, and then they're 12-0 in year 2. Was that just like he happened to be there in the perfect storm and the Nebraska bigger sample size that he's not a very good head coach? Was the Nebraska thing just a lot of things working against him and that he could work at UCF? It'll be very interesting to see because it was still a small sample at UCF as good as he did in that 1 second season, right? And also what's interesting on UCF, even though they went 4-8 last season, they had the second best yard differential in Big 12 play. So that probably indicates they have more talent and were better than the record indicated. But they obviously lose some players, and they were picked 12th in the Big 12 by Phil Steele. They were picked 15th by ESPN SP+, 57th best offense, 62nd best defense. But again, 9 through 16 are all very close together on ESPN SP+. They have all conference picks at second team running back with Jaden Nixon. They did lose RJ Harvey though. So, still a good running back, but it's probably not as good as it was last year. Paul Rubelt is a third team offensive tackle selection, but he's the only starter back. So not a lot back in the trenches. If you look at Phil Steele, his position ratings in the Big 12, the quarterback and receiver average to be position number 15.5 out of 16. That is not a good spot to be. They have 0 players with FBS starter experience at receiver. Then on defense, linebacker could be a struggle spot for them. DBs have no returners. There's a ton of portal additions, so that'll be interesting. I do think the one spot that you look out for with UCF is the defensive line. Defensive end, Nigel Lee Kennedy, he's one of the better defensive ends in the conference, and this is one of the better defensive lines in the conference. Is that going to be enough for them? And can Scott Frost develop the other stuff? The quarterback's Taven Jackson. He's a transfer from Indiana. I guess he's in competition with some other guys, but it's going to be a very interesting team. And UCF is a little similar to West Virginia. Now, the difference with West Virginia, okay, both these teams, let me start here. Both these teams, West Virginia and UCF, are teams that have a ton of new faces, a ton of transfers, 67 new players for UCF. We mentioned West Virginia has like 50 something new players and like 30 join, post spring ball. The negative for West Virginia is a bunch of them joined post spring ball. The positive for West Virginia is a lot of their new faces are players that at least were like maybe at Jacksonville State with Rich Rodriguez, where they do have that, cohesion with him at least a little bit into the system, into the scheme. Not as much the case with UCF, but again, you could argue that, okay, maybe UCF had the number 45 portal class. KU was 38th. So I don't know that I would argue that they brought in this incredible talent, but they're just kind of an unknown. And then the other part of this is that you're playing it on the road. UCF is 42-9 inside the bounce house the last 8 years. They are just 8-16-1 in home conference games against the spread. But, what matters more is, are you winning the game or losing? And they went 42-9. Now, they did a lot of that work before, entering the Big 12, and they lost home games last year. But point being, they're really good at home. It's a very difficult place to play. And this is kind of toward the middle of the season now where it's like, okay, they have all these new players. Are they going to be in the swing of things by this point in time? Still good you're playing them in the first half of the season as opposed to the second half. To kind of help with that. But at the same point in time, it is, at the end of the first half where they do have a little bit more time to get things together. But they, to me, are maybe the biggest enigma in the Big 12, just from a standpoint of like, okay, what is Scott Frost, right? Again, is he the guy at Nebraska who was not, a productive head coach and kept losing one-score games? Was he the guy his second year at UCF that led an undefeated, team that went off to play? I think that year was the year they played LSU in the Fiesta Bowl, maybe. Is that, which version is he, right? Is UCF the team who was 4-8 last year, or are they the team that had the second best yard differential in the Big 12? Then again, that team that did those things is mostly gone because it's like 70 new faces for them. So they are the toughest team, I think, to gauge. The fact that it's on the road, all road games in the Big 12 are scary, right? UCF might end up being the 15th best team in the Big 12. Arizona might be the 14th best team or the 16th best team in the Big 12. Kansas plays both those teams on the road. And even though they're games that Kansas, in my estimation, should be the better team in, that doesn't guarantee you're going to win. Because again, winning on the road in college football is very difficult. Winning on the road in the Big 12 when the talent level of these teams are a lot closer together is even more difficult, right? So that becomes the biggest difficulty there. I do think that, it's a good thing. Maybe you're playing it more toward the middle of the season in terms of avoiding it being too hot, especially as you work this 3-game segment before you have kind of your next bye week in there. But I like that you ramp up into it with 2 home games. That said, if you get upset in one of those 2 home games, West Virginia or Cincinnati, there's a lot more pressure on you to win at UCF, so you avoid dropping to that 1-2 hole versus, if you do win those first 2 games, West Virginia and Cincinnati, this is going to be a real opportunity to beat a team that, again, it's going to be tough, going to be on the road, and they are an enigma, so they could be much better than we think, but a good opportunity to try to grab one on the road, which we know those road wins can be so valuable to a season's momentum and building up your standing and what you can do. Can you make a bowl game? Can you contend for a conference title? All those things. All right, that'll do it, though, for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. We'll be back on Monday to talk a little KU basketball coach stuff. We'll be back on later next week to talk some more KU football as well. We got fall camp going on. We got KU basketball stuff going on. So make sure to subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. And see you next time with LOJ.